What if the Great Pyramids of Giza weren't built, but are being rendered into our reality? Now, this is a kind of a mind altering, kind of reality bending experience. And, if you're not ready for that, maybe skip this video. But if you're interested in expanding or at least exploring, again, these are ideas. This is not concrete evidence. I'm not claiming that this is the truth, but it's just a fascinating thought experiment for you to better grasp how reality may actually work. So, what brought this idea on was a TikTok gentleman, alive and kicking. He's got 600 or so videos, always an interesting exploration of how reality and consciousness may or may not work. And essentially, how he views reality is that the the concrete reality that we experience isn't necessarily this solid experience, that it's our mind that creates the solidity. It's editing all these different timelines together to create this, what seems like a coherent experience and a solid experience of reality, but that it is actually a lot more malleable, a lot more fluid. The reality that we exist in, the past timelines that are possible, the future timelines that are possible, are much more fluid than what most humans experience. And to kind of elucidate this, there's the idea of the Great Pyramids of Giza. And this is what Alive and Kicking, the TikTok gentleman, was talking about, was that, and again, you can research this, you can go back, you can try to find evidence of it. But essentially what he was saying is that before the 1700s, there's really little or no mention of the Great Pyramids of Giza. Scientists have said, they were built 5,000 years ago, and so much of history takes place, written history, the Bible, Greek history, Roman history, a lot of them take place in this land of Chem or Egypt. And there's just very little, if not any, mention of the Great Pyramids in any of the biblical stories, in any of the Roman histories as they were conquering Egypt. They just don't mention. And you would think, being the tallest structures on the planet for thousands and thousands of years, that they would have been mentioned at least. And even shows this image of a 19th century picture. Somebody took a picture of the Sphinx with the pyramids in the background, that iconic picture. And in the 1900s, it's the Sphinx is thinner and even more cracked and broken. The pyramids seem to be even more decayed than they do today. And of course, there's been some construction and some updating, but noticeable difference between the images of the 19th century Giza pyramids and today's images of the Giza pyramids. And essentially what he's suggesting, and this kind of follows with the rules and laws of consciousness, is that these pyramids, with timelines being somewhat fluid, the past timelines being fluid, that these pyramids are rendering into our current awareness because of our raising of consciousness, that they are being rendered in as part of our history, because we are co-creating this collective awareness, this collective consciousness. And that these pyramids are remnants of the current level of consciousness on the planet. So how does that make sense? Let me try to break that down. So essentially, as we as a collective raise our consciousness, we are changing the past timelines of our experiences. We're doing that on a collective level. And again, we're coming from this experience of very solid, very materialistic perspectives of how reality works. that there was no fluidity in time, that there was one arrow of time that started at the beginning and is going to the end. And what quantum mechanics is challenging is that rigidity of time. So imagine as our consciousness evolves, so do the timelines of our past experiences. And, essentially what starts to happen, what renders into our reality is this probabilistic um, idea, probabilistic based rendering. So essentially, there's these probabilities. This is where the collapse of the wave function, there's these probabilistic outcomes of the collapse of the wave function that is happening. And based on the consciousness of the viewer of the wave pattern, there's a probability that it'll collapse into what it has collapsed into 1,000 different times over and over and over again. But there's also a probability that it'll collapse into a different experience, a different history, a different timeline, a different way that the material, that the atoms and quarks are materializing, that there's a probability that they will do that. And what seems to change the probability is the beliefs, the patterns, the consciousness of the beings that are viewing or experiencing that wave function. So, as these wave functions begin to collapse, as the rendering engine is basically collapsing wave functions, what starts to show up are these different timelines throughout history. And this is where we get into this co-creation. So what we want to start to realize is that reality is just this amalgamation of all of our human consciousnesses that are collapsing wave functions, and that a lot of times these wave functions are being collapsed from our past experiences, from our past memories, not just our memories in this particular lifetime, your particular lifetime, but also the memories and experiences that ancestors have had. Because roughly 16 generations of our ancestors' innate beliefs and patterns are encoded into our DNA. We are a product of those, even at a very unconscious and subconscious level. And it started out, especially before pre-internet, pre-world travel, we had all these localized, these kind of tribal, regional consciousnesses. And as we continue to expand our awareness and consciousness, as we become a globalized consciousness, through the internet, through media, through quantum transferring of information, we're starting to pop those localized bubbles, and we're having this generalized, this globalized consciousness. And it's continuing to unify. It's continuing to unify the reality that we are all experiencing. And this is where we start to come into this higher level of consciousness, when we're all experiencing reality, consciousness on the same level, and we all understand that we are creators of that consciousness, that we each play a role in the consciousness that we are creating. Well, then we can start to have these remembrances of these ancient technologies, and they start to come into being. They start to come into form, come into our reality. So then where my thought process led was, how about, again, we in the present moment are creating reality in 5,000 years ago. So what is happening right now? Well, I think there are beings that are from other timelines, other dimensions, that they're, what we call interdimensional beings, aliens, angels, anything outside of our five sense reality, that these consciousnesses are having an effect on our reality right now, that they are there, as their consciousness is being raised, they are having an effect on our consciousness. And how does that work? Well, when you meditate, when you tune into your higher self, when you connect with angels or aliens or interdimensional beings, or you take your consciousness and move it into the causal planes of reality, that you start to become a larger and larger part of the co-creation. So, there's some human beings that have a very little impact. They're basically, these would be called the NPCs, or the lower consciousness beings, that have just little effect on the totality of the consciousness of the experience. They're basically just experiencing the consciousness that everybody else is sharing with them. And then there is these, incredible humans that are alive that seem to have just absolute control, are able to affect change in reality in ways that we haven't really seen before. And how are they doing that? I am supposing that they're doing that by making this connection to these external beings, that these beings are always beaming in energy, information, all this technology that seems to be coming to the planet. What comes to mind are these, I've been watching these videos on organizations, NPOs, universities that are trying to back engineer these UAP technologies, right? And what I'm imagining is these beings from other dimensions are essentially rendering into our reality these UAPs, these unidentified aerial phenomenon. And what it's doing is it's sparking the imagination of the humans that are here. And those humans that are able to get into a theta or alpha brainwave state are able to connect with these intelligences. They might view it as having a spark of excitement, or a spark of intuition, or this idea just kind of came to them. But what if it really was just this connection to these other intelligences in the world, and that is what's sparking this massive shift in technology, this shift in how we create, how we build, how we basically run this world. And again, what I think is happening is there's a evolution in the human, that there's this sixth sense that's awakening in more and more and more and more humans, and that intuition, inner knowing, this energetic sensitivity, spirituality, is starting to become commonplace in the human experience. And because we're going from this materialistic to a more sixth sense, our ability to notice and understand these higher levels of reality, that some people are getting confused. And that's, again, that's their journey. But the more information, the more we're able to share, the more we're able to put this idea out there that this isn't bad, that this isn't a negative thing, that this isn't, these beings aren't coming here to command or control us, that they're here to help with our development. The more human evolution is going to happen, the more that we're going to render into our reality this evolution in consciousness. So as we think about this, as you think about this, I want you to really start to understand the ways in which you are able to shift your consciousness. It starts first with observation. Are you able to notice your thoughts, beliefs, and patterns, or are they just ruling your world and you feel like you're um, a victim to those thoughts, beliefs, and patterns? Do you believe that you can change your thoughts, beliefs, and patterns? And if you can't observe them, if you can't see them, then your awareness hasn't expanded out enough to be able to see them. The next one is detachment. That's where you recognize that you're not your thoughts, that you are in fact the observer of your thoughts. There's the thoughts that are happening inside of your mind. These thoughts are just an amalgamation of the past experiences that you and your lineages have had. And what's actually happening is you are observing those thoughts. You are observing the thoughts. And that is the thing that you are, is the one that is observing those thoughts. And then the last one is meditation, is cultivating the awareness of expanded states of consciousness, interconnectedness with all things, with everything that is possible. You could talk about the universe or God, this connection to the intelligences that exist outside of the five sense reality. And that is where meditation comes in. You can actually have access to them. Take it from me. I've done it. It's, go look at studies by ions or, um, almost any psychological or study of psychology is starting to understand that there are these altered states of consciousness and awareness that humans are capable of getting into, that it's not superhuman or anything like that, that it really is just a practice. Just like you lift weights to build muscle, you practice meditation to get into altered states of consciousness. So, I have one question for you. Are you creating the future based on your past experiences, or are you connecting to a vision of a future that is beyond anything you think is possible? And I want you to really, really think about that. How are you creating your personal future? Is it based on all the past experiences that you had? Or are you allowing yourself to imagine a future that is far more beautiful? Because we are rendering our reality, both collectively and individually. We are rendering the reality into existence. And the higher your level of consciousness, the more you're capable of rendering more of reality into the experience. So, if you're creating from fear, from pain, from past experiences that have been negative, that have been limiting, that have lowered your consciousness, well, you're going to continue to render experiences that are lowering your consciousness. But if you let go, if you detach from those old experiences and you believe in a future that is, it may even seem impossible, but you continue to put energy and you start to consciously experience and create that reality, well, that's the reality that's going to start rendering into our collective consciousness. So, as always, this is just the beginning of an understanding of how our inner world shapes our outer one. And I want you to really think, what are you willing to imagine into existence? How do you want reality to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? And focus your intention on that. Let go of everything that is happening in the news, in the media, in world politics, in all of that stuff. And focus and put your attention on the reality that you want to be experiencing. And as you raise your consciousness, as you continue to raise your consciousness, you will play a bigger and bigger role in what renders into our reality. So, as always, I appreciate you joining me in these thought experiments, these explorations of consciousness. And please leave a message. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to hear about next. What videos do you want to hear from me? And if you want to connect, I'd love to connect with people who are on this journey, that are exploring consciousness with me. So, as always, really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening, watching. And if you want to join the Substack, it is joegarner.substack.com. Free to join if you feel called to donate, to send money. There's a couple different levels you can do so. And as always, appreciate you guys. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.